Oh, hello again. It's been a while since I made a video, just like talking about crazy stuff that I own, just random trinkets and stuff that I've collected on my travels. Because yeah, for like a period of like 2 years of my life, I just was kind of like living on the road. I didn't really have I had a permanent address, but like I was kind of transient. And that was a lot of fun actually. It was a lot of fun just to go out and travel and like see stuff and like see parts of the world that I had really only ever engaged with via like National Geographic or like reading a book or something. So that was really cool to actually get to go out to places and like see stuff and do things in different places that I'd always read about doing and visiting. And so it was a lot of fun. It was also very tiring. It was exhausting at the same time because like yeah, being on the road like almost nonstop is kind of exhausting because you want to have like a place that you come back to all the time and like are able to like relax in and zone out in. And so yeah, you don't really notice until like you don't realize how much it's nice to have like a home to come home to until you're like on the road and you don't have a home to come home to all the time. So it was an interesting experience. But yeah, this story that I'm going to tell you is basically about all of the stuff that I collected. Not all the stuff. There's a lot of stuff that is just sort of like out and about in my apartment. But this is the stuff that like you wouldn't normally see unless you were to actually go through like my files or something like that. So yeah, without further ado, this story begins in 2023 when I moved to Montreal. So I had been, after COVID, I left Toronto. I had lived in Toronto for, oh God, maybe 13 years. I was originally born in Toronto, and I moved to the place that I grew up in, which is Prince Edward County. And then after that, I went to school in Ottawa. And then after that, I went to Toronto where I lived and worked. And then after COVID, I moved back home with my mom for a bit because rent was ridiculously expensive, especially with just the CERB payment to cover it. And moved home, enjoyed having, being back in the country, having space to walk around in during the day that wasn't, surrounded by other people and, dealing with the idea of like going from isolation to then being around people and masking and all that stuff. So it was very nice in that sense, just to be able to like walk outside into the yard and, be in the fresh air. But I was able to start working remotely at that point in time, and then I was able to buy a house in Napanee, which is like 30 minutes away from here, where I ended up living for a year. And then after that year of putting, some capital into the house and towards like the mortgage and stuff, I decided it would be fun to maybe try living somewhere else that I always wanted to live. And Montreal was the place that came up because when I left university, I had the opportunity to think about moving to Montreal at that point in time. And I kind of wish that I had done that because like when I was younger, it would have been easier to pick up like a second language. Not that like in Canada you take French up until at least grade 9, at least in Ontario, and it would have been better, I think, and it would have stuck with me more had I have at the age of like 22 out of university gone to Montreal to start picking it up. But anyways, this is a long story. So I went to Montreal and I was living at a place in Rue Saint Antoine and Guy Street, and it was pretty great. It was a third floor walk up. It had 2 skylights in it. It was a 2-bedroom apartment. It cost $1,400 a month Canadian to rent it out. And when you looked out my front window, 2 blocks away was the Bell Center. So it was pretty sweet. It was a pretty ideal location. I really enjoyed it, and that was really cool. I briefly had a job working in Place Ville-Marie, in one of the buildings that has the Via Rail headquarters is in that building, and I worked for a call center there that we did. What the hell did we do? We cold called people about their payment processing setups to try to get them to switch over. So that was what I did, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed living in Montreal. Sorry, I really enjoyed living in Montreal because I had always wanted to live there. It's a very cool city. It's a very sort of like it's got that old world sort of charm to it, but it's also, you know, a North American city nonetheless. I enjoyed having to think about, you know, trying to communicate things in French during the day. That was always fun, and I enjoyed just the general vibe of the city. Like it's more of a relaxed than like Ottawa or Toronto was when I lived there. So like I really like that about that. But yeah, when I was there, I collected this map, which is about old Montreal. From there, I set out on a couple different journeys. I drove across to Vancouver a couple times, which, I mean, if you've never done that, is a bit of a trek. And I slept in my car most of the way, both times. The first time was in the winter. I took a little detour down onto Lake of the Woods, which was really cool because they have an ice road there, and so you can drive around on the ice, which was like sick. And then my car battery died, and I had to flag somebody down to help me out with that. And afterwards, I drove back to Winnipeg. I changed the battery in the parking lot of a Canadian Tire, which was great, and then continued on my way. And then when I got to Vancouver, I settled down for like a week at a hostel that I knew was there, and then I came back to Montreal after that week because I was like, yeah, I think I'm ready to go back and you know, finish out the winter there. And so the second time I went was in the summer, but before that, I decided to go to Ireland actually. So I went to Ireland, which was the first international trip that I took. I don't have a map for it. It was the first international trip that I took after COVID had sort of ended, and so that was really cool. Because yeah, I went to Dublin. I stayed in Dublin for like a week. Randomly, I didn't plan on this, but it was at the same time that President Biden was in Ireland on his visit, and it was kind of cool because like there was one day where I got interrupted on one of my expeditions by the motorcade, and made me late to get to the Literature Museum, and so they gave me a free ticket to come back the next day for free entry. So thank you, President Biden, for saving me some money on my trip. That was great. But while I was there, I did a walking tour, and one of the cool things that I got to go see was Marsh's Library, which is near, I want to say, the Blackpool, and where is it, St. Patrick's Cathedral is. But this library is like super cool. It was opened in 1707. It was the first public library in Ireland, and you can actually sit in some of the like original desk areas that they have in the old reading room, and Bram Stoker worked there, as well as James Joyce. They both worked out of that very place, so it was kind of cool to sit down there and to see like all these like super old books that they've preserved on the walls and everything. So that was a really cool, fun highlight. I also went to while I was there, I went to Galway Bay, I went to Sligo, and I went to Belfast for the day. And that was all really good because you can just take the rail system out. I think the longest trip was like 3 hours or something to get to like Sligo, and all of that was super cool. I got to do some like really neat stuff. Like I went hiking up the side of Knocknarea is the name of the mountain, and it's this, at the top of it is a cairn that was built for Queen Maeve, who was a queen of, I want to say, Connacht. I'm probably going to pronounce that wrong, but she was the queen, and they buried her standing up, allegedly, facing Ulster, which is their traditional rival, if you will. And so that was actually really kind of cool to get to do that experience. And then what was it? William Butler Yeats used to live there in Schlaga as well. So they have all these murals of his poetry around the city, and that was actually really cool to get to see. I was there, randomly stopped in like a game store and talked to somebody who was from Peterborough, which was like small world. That was pretty cool. Yeah, one of those real small world moments. And then I went back to Dublin, and then from Dublin I decided to go to London. And that was my first time ever going to London. I did not get any Mentos that time. But yeah, so I went to London. That was really cool. I stayed for a week in Waterloo, I want to say. I could be wrong about that, but it was definitely on the south side of the River Thames, and it was near Waterloo Station. But it was also near North Lambeth Station, I want to say, the one that's like red tile. Could be wrong, but anyways, it was kind of cool because like I just walked around the entire time and I got to see a bunch of cool stuff that I had always wanted to see but never had the time previously, because I was always working part-time places and just trying to maintain my hours to keep my job situation going. So yeah, that was actually a really cool experience. And then from there I went back to Montreal, and then like a month or so, 2 months later, maybe something like that, I ended up going out on a much longer trip where I drove around most of North America at that point in time. And this was really cool. This was actually like a lot of fun to do. That is a different trip that I took. Okay, so when I went out that time, what I got to do and see, which was super cool, was I got back to Winnipeg. And so when I got back to Winnipeg, it was, first of all, at that point in time, this was in 2023, it was that was a record-setting day for turnout for their Pride Festival in the city of Winnipeg. So that was pretty cool to find out. And then the other thing that I did, that I learned when I was there, was that the Métis Nation had just finished treaty negotiations with the nation of Canada. And so finally, after like 150 some years, the Métis Nation was finally going to be given status with the nation of Canada. And that was actually really cool to sort of see and to engage with, because I hadn't quite figured out this part of the story yet, but this part of the story is important. So there was a rebellion or resistance, sorry, there was a resistance, Northwest Resistance, that happened. That was in the 1880s, I want to say 1885. And Louis Riel came back from his exile in America. He joined up with Gabriel Dumont, and they both gathered the Métis Nation at Batoche. Louis Riel assumed full command and decided to hold out there against the Canadian army that ended up showing up. This was also in protest to the railway that was being built across the country. And so the railway ironically got boosted in its importance because of the rebellion, because it did help to speed travelers, especially the army, across the country to get to Saskatchewan, to Batoche. And that helped to, sell the idea that this was a good investment of money. The main, sort of person behind the idea of building the railroad was Sir John A. Macdonald, Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald, though he wasn't the only government, because he was originally Prime Minister, and then they started to build it, and I think Mackenzie became Prime Minister in between briefly, and then it went back to Macdonald. I could be wrong about that history, it doesn't really matter at this moment in time. But so he wasn't like the sole builder of it, but we generally acknowledge him as being sort of the builder of the railroad. He grew up in Prince Edward County, actually. He grew up in a mill that is he partly grew up in a mill that is just below the elementary school that I went to in North Marysburg. And he worked as a lawyer in town. And he also, I think, wrote some stuff for the paper. I could be wrong about that. But then he also had connections with Napanee and then Kingston, and then he went on to, of course, become Canada's first Prime Minister, and he moved around to all the different places. And so, yeah, so it was kind of interesting. But one of the units that was sent out to Batoche was a railway building unit in the Canadian Army, and its regimental heritage or history continues on into the Great War. And I have I'm not entirely sure what their classification with me is, like if it's like a great grand uncle or something, but there's a family member that I have who served in the continuation of that unit in World War One, and so they built all of the tracks behind the lines, behind the trenches, that would move stuff, they would move ammunition and supplies from the supply depots up to other ammunition caches and drop-off spots towards the front lines. And so yeah, they built all the tracks and operated all that stuff as railway units in the Great War. And so his unit had a connection to Batoche, which I didn't know at the time, but I found out later. Anyways, so while I was driving around, I went to Louis Riel's grave, actually, which is just across the river from the Forks, and the Forks was actually where they were having the Pride Festival that day, so that was kind of cool. I went from there out to Regina. I continued on to Regina. I spent the night in Regina, and in the morning I learned that there was going to be a thunderstorm if I continued west. So instead I decided to go north, and I actually detoured up to Batoche. And so I went to Batoche and got this discovery booklet when I was there, and got to walk around the village, which was really cool to see all of the the preserved sort of buildings and stuff, and to get to really sort of experience the space, because when you read about this stuff, you don't really get a sense of like actually how far or how big these battles were. Like if you read about any military history, sometimes you don't quite grasp that. It's like, in a way, I want to say it's like kind of like when you think about like space exploration and stuff, it's like you don't quite grasp how small Earth is in comparison to the rest of the universe around you until somebody's like, yeah, if you pull out like a bunch of dimes in your pocket, it's like the ball of lint or something. It's you need to sort of grasp that sometimes to really understand those spaces. But yeah, Batoche was super cool to go to and see, especially on this anniversary where they've because this was the end of sort of the Métis dream of becoming a nation and gaining status. This was in the 1880s. And this was the place that it sort of ended at. And so it was really interesting to go to it, having just learned the news that they were going to now finally, like 150 some years later, sign a treaty with the nation of Canada to finally gain status. And that was really cool to go see. When I went, there was a number of people who were there with traditional hoop skirts on and things like that, doing their own journeys, and that was really kind of cool to see. I went down to the Saskatchewan River and sat beside it for a bit when I was there, and I had this pair of muddy shoes that I bought at a Walmart in Winnipeg that I walked down to the Forks and they got covered in Red River mud, and so I kept them and ended up leaving them there. And from there, I then headed south. I went back down towards Regina, and then I went over to the Cypress Hills. And when you go to the Cypress Hills, you can go to a place called Fort Walsh. And Fort Walsh is a fort that was built. It was for the Northwest Mounted Police, actually, to monitor Sitting Bull, because Sitting Bull and the Hunkpapa Lakota, after the Battle of the Greasy Grass, or as most people know it as the Battle of the Little Bighorn, actually left and came to Canada to try to find a space to live in exile. And we're hoping to be able to sign a treaty with the Queen, but because they were not one of the original treaty signatories, they weren't able to try and gain status that way. So they ended up settling for a bit in the Cypress Hills, and they were watched over by a Northwest Mounted Police officer named James Walsh. And James Walsh comes from Prescott, Ontario, actually, which is not too far down the road. It's actually between here and Montreal. And so he was originally from Prescott, and he was sent out, and he ended up looking over or looking after Sitting Bull and the Lakota while they were here in Canada. And when they returned them, and when they decided to return to the States, I believe the story is that it was like 2 or 3 RCMP officers went down with them, and then the entire 7th Army, 7th Cavalry was waiting for them at the border to escort them the rest of the way back. But I don't know how true all those numbers are, but I can tell you that Sitting Bull did actually give Walsh his headdress, his war shirt, and a card that he autographed with a picture of a buffalo. And you can see all of those things at the ROM in Toronto. And I used to live up the street from the ROM. And I loved to always go in and see stuff that was in there. And that was always one of the things that I was sort of drawn to. So it was kind of cool to do all these like full circle sort of things. And I also have an uncle who was in the RCMP. So it was kind of cool just to go to like see all this stuff and to, you know, visit all of these places that you hear about, you read about, but you never maybe like think about going out to actually see them. And so that is part of the Cypress Hills Interprovincial Park. That is on the Saskatchewan side of the park. And so this is a map of the entire park that I got. So Fort Walsh is over here. This is Saskatchewan, and this is Alberta. And from here, you can actually drive across on this dirt road over into Alberta towards the town of, I want to say it's called Elkhorn. And there's like a Elkwater, I'm sorry. Yeah, you can get to Elkwater that way, and there's a bunch of like, I don't think it's skiing. I don't think they necessarily do. Oh no, they do skiing. Yeah, there's skiing on here. Because it's not as hilly as you might think it might be for that kind of stuff. But yeah, they do actually have skiing there. So there's a ski resort, and there's a lake, the Elkwater Lake, and then you can continue back up to the Trans-Canada Highway and on your way across the country. And so that was a thing that I did, and that was actually really like a lot of fun to go and see. I then spent a few more days just sort of driving around, seeing stuff. I went to Kootenay, I went to Jasper, I went to Banff. That's not in the correct order. I went to Kootenay, I went to Banff, I went to Jasper, and then I went to Mount Robson, and I slept in the parking lot of Mount Robson one night, which was pretty cool. Mount Robson, I believe, is the tallest mountain in Canada. So that was kind of cool. From there, I then went down, I want to say Highway 5. I could be wrong about the number, but I went down through the valley, and then I eventually got to a point where I could continue down into the Okanagan and then out to Vancouver that way, or I could go off and go up to Lillooet and then across and around and down through Whistler. I decided to do that because that just seemed more interesting, and like, when was I ever going to get the opportunity to do that again? So I did that. It was really cool. Lillooet was really interesting, and there was a really cool park that you drive through as part of it, and that was really cool. I saw a bunch of bears when I was there. That was sweet, because yeah, you don't normally get to see a lot of bears, and like, they're just fascinating because they're just like giant. So yeah, so I continued on the way. I got down to Horseshoe Bay, and I decided that I would take the ferry across to Vancouver Island. And that was really cool because it was kind of foggy that night. And so it was like, it was almost like a movie setting. So it was like, we got onto the ferry and then we took off, and because of all of the fog and stuff, like all of the, some of them are islands, but a lot of it, I forget what you call the cliffs or whatever, like, we're just sort of like looming up out of the fog as we were going through, and it was this really cool setting. And then we got to Vancouver Island, and it was night, and I got down to Victoria, and I was able to get into a hotel for the night. And then from there, I decided to go back to Vancouver, where I ended up staying. And it turns out in the like 4-month span, 3 or 4 months that I had last been there, the place that I usually stayed at, which was the Sunseeker Hostel or something like that, had shut down, or at least it was moving locations. I think it's reopened now, but yeah, it shut down. So I had to find a different place to stay. So I stayed at the St. Regis, um, which was very, she after you're spending all that time sleeping in my car across the prairies. But it was nice. It was kind of luxurious. It was like, sweet, this is civilization again. It's not sleeping in the back of my car. But I will say CRVs are pretty good if you want to sleep in the back of them, because you can put down the back seat. You can flip down the back seat, and it's sort of like the perfect height when it's flipped down for you to for it to fit your shoulder. So it's like you kind of don't really need like a pillow unless you want to sleep on something soft, in which case, get a pillow. But yeah, it's perfect for sleeping in the back of your car. And so there you go. Things that you learn when you actually do the activity. So from Vancouver, I decided to go. I decided to try to go through the Peace Arch, because I was like, technically it's faster to go through the northern states to get back to Ontario than it is to take the Trans-Canada back across. And so I got to the border, and at the time I was trying, where did I put this? At the time I was trying to, oh, here it is. At the time I was trying to get my UK ancestry visa sorted out. So my passport was in an office in Montreal. No, it was in Ottawa. I'm sorry, it was in Ottawa. And it was just sitting in limbo because I didn't have one of the, I didn't have the actual copy of like my dad's long form birth certificate. So I had to apply for that at some point in time. And so it was just sort of sitting in limbo in this like filing cabinet in this office in Ottawa. And I rocked up to the border at the Peace Arch, and my license had expired, my Ontario license had expired, and I hadn't gotten it switched over to a Quebec license yet. And so I showed up at the border with a temporary driver's license. This isn't the actual one. This is, I wish I could have kept the actual one, because that was the really important one. But when I got it redone again, they kept it. And I think they shred them, but yeah, it got taken away. The actual one that I used got taken away from me. So this is the replacement for the actual one that I used. So I rocked up at the border with this and a plastic and the plastic version of my driver's license that was just good as a photo ID only. And so I had to explain to this guy at the border that, like, yeah, I'm really sorry. I actually do not have my passport on me, and this is why. But, I was sort of routed this way because this is the fastest way for me to get back to Ontario. And, after, I don't know, what felt like 20 minutes on the phone, there was a large lineup of cars behind us and everything. They graciously let me into the country. And I continued on my way south, and so then I stopped, and I stopped in, I was like Blaine. I went to Blaine, and I got some apples, and I got some water and stuff, and I loaded up the car, and I was like, okay, which way am I gonna go right now? And I decided to go, because once you get into the States, you get like 90 days on a visitor visa. I was like, well, I could just drive straight across the northern states and go back to Ontario and just be done with it and go back to Canada. Or, because I've now come into this country, I can stay here for like 90-ish days and just drive around for a bit. So I decided to do that. And I went to Seattle. I stayed in Seattle for a couple nights. I got to go see an actual a game at Mariners Park. I did not have my phone on me, and they were able to provide me with it's like a paper visitor's pass ticket. It's like really cool. It's square, it's rectangular. I don't think I have it in here. I think it's in with my baseball tickets, but they gave me that. And like what was super cool about this experience was when you show up with it, somebody has to escort you, and one of the staff members has to escort you into the building, and they escorted me through what was the sort of like front office entryway into it. So like that was super cool. There was a giveaway night, and because I went in through that doorway, I got like a free t-shirt, and then went to the game, enjoyed going to the game. I really enjoy baseball stadiums because like, unlike other sports, each baseball stadium is unique to the city and the neighborhood that it's in. I can't think of really any other sports where the playing field changes at each location. Like there's the basics, of what your playing field is, but then like all the outfield lines are different, right? Because like football, hockey, basketball, and I'm gonna sound like an idiot trying to think of what the other major sports are, but like all other major sports have set boundaries of this is what the playing size of the field is, and then like it's the seats that change around it, right? It's like the seat sizes that change around it. You could maybe argue with hockey there's like Olympic size ice, and then there's NHL size ice, and like you can get into those specifics, but like ultimately every NHL ice pad is the exact same in its dimensions. It's just the seating around it changes. Whereas in baseball, the outfield actually changes in each one, and then they create the stadium to actually reflect something about the neighborhood or something about the city that it's in. And I just think that's fascinating. Like I love that about baseball. And so like I love visiting baseball stadiums because of that. Also, it's in the summer, so it makes it kind of ideal to do that. Anyways, yeah, I went to this Mariners game. That was really cool. I went to the University of Washington because I had briefly been, or I tried to be a competitive rower in my 30s, and in my early 30s, and so I went to the University of Washington to see the Huskies rowing house because I had also read The Boys in the Boat, which is about the gold medal U.S. gold medal winning team that beat Hitler's German rowing team. And yeah, that was really cool to just drive around and get to try to find it. I did all of this, by the way, with a paper map book because I did not have my phone on me, and so yeah, like I just bought one of those like the big truckers like roadside map atlas things and just drove around with that, and it was perfectly fine. They're great to get between cities. They kind of suck if you want to like find stuff within a city, but hey, what you got to deal with what you got to deal with sometimes. So from there, I went down to Los Angeles, and along the way I got to drive through Redwood, which was super cool. I saw the Pacific in Northern California, where I stopped on a beach one day, or like in an afternoon after I got into California. That was super cool. I continued on the way. I went to Big Sur and Salinas and Monterey, and so I saw a bunch of the John Steinbeck stuff. That was really cool. When I was there was another guy who had an Ontario plated car who was like honking his horn at me and was like waving. And so I got up to him in the traffic, and he rolled down his window and we were talking, and he was on his way actually back to Canada, and I was like, I'm going down to LA. So I continued on my way, and I went down to LA. I took a detour down along the coast, so I went to Santa Barbara, which actually takes you past Vandenberg Space Force Base, which is kind of funny because I have a friend who is whose last name is Vandenberg, and he's obsessed with like space and robots and stuff, and I thought that was kind of that gave me a good laugh. And then I continued down into Santa Barbara. I stopped in a little place called Summerland at the Summerland Beach, and I tried to wash a little bit there while people were walking their dogs along the beach that morning, and then I continued on my way into LA. I think I stopped for gas in like Calabasas or something, and then I like continued on, and I saw this big sign on the highway for the Silver Lake Motel, and I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna stay there because I have no idea where I'm going. And so I did. So I stayed in Silver Lake for, I want to say 3 or 4 days. This was around Juneteenth. The Juneteenth concert was actually held at the Greek Theater, which was just up the street from where I was staying. That was actually kind of cool because I got to watch on TV the Juneteenth thing, and I was like, I've just driven by that a bunch of times. So I went to, what else did I do when I was there? I went to the Griffith Park Observatory. I drove around Dodger Stadium at that point in time, but I was only there for like a few days, so I didn't really plan on going to a game. So I did that. And I basically just like hung around in Silver Lake, which was like super like interesting neighborhood to like be around. It turns out when the second time that I went that was actually there's a bunch of like initial sort of Walt Disney sites there, and then the neighborhood that's just sort of to the north of it is when he's buried there. So his grave is actually in whatever that neighborhood is, and then like the pub that he used to hang out in with all of like the other artists and stuff is in that neighborhood. A bunch of his like early houses that he lived in are also over there. So it was like really interesting because like I didn't plan any of this, it just like happened. But yeah, so anyway, so I did all that. That was super cool. And then I went out to Santa Monica Beach. I like enjoyed, you know, seeing the Pacific again from a different place. I went out on the pier. I really like the view from the pier, especially if you get like the guardrail in it, because it just feels like you're staring off into like the end of the world essentially. Love that view. And then from there I went, I decided to go east. I was like, I should probably head back east now. So I headed off and I went up to Las Vegas. And so I went up through and past, is it Death Valley? I think it's Death Valley. I don't think it's Joshua Tree, but or maybe they're both there and my brain just doesn't work very well. But and maybe all three of those things are correct. But anyways, I went through there. It was really cool to like go through that area, and just see like all of the change as you go from like the major built up city of LA out into like kind of like the mountainy hill area, out into like desert, and then off into Las Vegas. I went straight through Las Vegas that time and continued on my way, went up through part of Utah until I got to Colorado, and I hit the 70, and I took a 70 straight across, which was super easy to follow and to navigate on. And so you get across, so like Kansas felt like it took forever to get across, but like I actually ended up really liking Kansas at the end of all of it. So like it's totally fine by me that it felt like it took forever, because it was actually a pretty cool place. You think it's going to be boring, but it's actually like kind of cool. If you like, I mean, as long as you like, you know, farmland and stuff like that, it's fine. I'd also, you know, driven across the prairies in Canada through Saskatchewan and Alberta a bunch of times, so it was like just that, but like slightly further south. So yeah, so that was really cool. I got up to Detroit that time. I ended up staying in Detroit for a few days. I got into Detroit, actually. It was the anniversary of the first reading of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. That was in Detroit. It was like the 50th anniversary. That date might be wrong, because it would have been 60. Yeah, that date's wrong. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The story, the math on this story doesn't really need to be exact. Anyways, it was the anniversary of that. That was really cool. I've stayed in a hotel that was an old fire hall headquarters. It was like the Detroit fire headquarters for all of Detroit, and they've converted it now into a hotel. It was super cool. I ended up staying there. I got a phone when I was there, and then I continued on my way to New York City. I went through Ohio, which is an experience, and Pennsylvania also felt like it took forever to get across. But yeah, I got across Pennsylvania. I got into New York City. I ended up trying to find a place. I actually tried to look for a place in Brooklyn, not quite Dumbo, but more like downtown Brooklyn. But I couldn't find anything when I was driving around, so I ended up going back to Manhattan, and I ended up staying at the Hilton in Midtown, I want to say, that's near like MoMA and all that stuff, and that was a lot of fun. I don't think I did a whole lot when I was there that time. I think I went to just like the Strand bookstore and stuff. That's why, because previously to heading out on this trip, I had gone actually to New York, and I had done a purpose trip to New York where I stayed in the Lower East Side, which is like my favorite place to stay in. And I got to see this Punk and Beyond exhibit when I was there. This was actually super cool. This was like all these music, all these instruments that were played by all of these different people. Vernon Reid's guitar was there. That was really cool. They had, where is it here? David Peel's acoustic was there. David Peel was a friend of John Lennon's. And Johnny Thunders. They had Johnny Thunders from New York, the New York Dolls. They had Lou Reed's guitar was there. That was super cool. They had a piano from the living room that Norah Jones had played. So it was just really cool to get to see all this stuff. And that was a super interesting thing. I went up to the Cloisters, which is always a really cool trip to do. And I did that in the spring. I did that after I went to Ireland. So I got back from Ireland and then I went to New York the first time. And then like a month or so later, I ended up driving there after the end of my giant month-long trip across North America. I stayed in New York for a little bit and then I left New York and headed back to, I was like, maybe I'll try to go back to California. Yeah, maybe that's what I'll do. Don't ask me why. I was just following my own little brain around and letting it just sort of work on autopilot to some extent. I got back to Kansas. I ended up in Manhattan, Kansas. I remember thinking, how did I drive for like 3 days and I'm still in the same place, as a joke? But like, quite honestly, yeah, like Manhattan, man. It's kind of like, yeah, I guess Springfield. There's like 7 or 8 Springfields in the States. So yeah, anyways. I continued on from there and I got to, what the heck is the name of it? Kit Carson. Just outside of Kit Carson, there was like maybe it's not Kit Carson, but that's the name that sticks with me. There was like a roadside pull-off that I slept in overnight in Colorado, and then I was like, oh, what am I doing right now? Like, I'm now stuck in between these two places and I need to pick one to go to, and I ended up deciding that I would try to go back to New York. So I went back to New York, and when I got to New York, I was like, okay, maybe this isn't where I want to be either, so I'm gonna go back to Montreal. So I ended up crossing the border back into Canada in like the middle of the night on, I want to say it was Independence Day, with literally just this again as my ID, and the Canadian border guard was kind of confused about the entire situation, which is understandable. And they were like, they were telling me that they knew for a fact that there was no way that I would have gotten into the States without a passport. And I was like, well, I can tell you for a fact, as I'm sitting in this car, that this is my only piece of ID on me. So, yeah, so they went back in. I went back to Montreal, ended up staying there for a little bit. Briefly went to Toronto. I got to see a really cool exhibit in Toronto that was, it was Salvador Dali's watercolors of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. And so that was really cool to get to go see. Then I went back to Montreal, and then I got the idea that I should go out to Calgary for some reason. So I went out to Calgary for like a couple days, and I went back to a few places. Like I rented a truck when I got there, and I went out into the prairie one night and just enjoyed that. And then I went out to, the next day I went out to Numa Falls, which is in Kootenay, and I'd spent a night there sleeping, actually. There's a waterfall and stuff. And when I came back into Calgary, there was a grizzly bear just walking along the side of the highway. So that was super cool. Yeah, got back into Calgary, and then from Calgary I was like, I don't know why I'm here, so I'm instead going to go someplace that I would like to go see again. And I'd already seen the Barbie movie at this point in time, so I was like, I'm gonna try out beach again, why not? Yeah, my experience with Barbie and Oppenheimer with Barbenheimer was that I then spent like 2 years, or at least a year and a half, bouncing from former battlefield to beach, to former battlefield to beach, to beach that was a former battlefield. And so that was my takeaway from those two movies. I mean, I loved both of them. They were great, for different reasons, obviously. But
Yeah, like that was just what happened to me. I thought it was super cool at the end of Barbie when she gets dropped off for her vagina installment. The building that they stop in front of is a building that is right above the cliff escarpment that you can look down and see Santa Monica Beach from. And I had actually stopped in front of that exact same building in my Honda CRV like a few months before that movie came out, and was like, so when I saw that, I was like, this is super cool. I've literally been in that exact spot. Because I got lost, I couldn't figure out how to get down to Santa Monica Beach, and so then yeah, I realized I was like a couple roads off from the exit down, so I did that. But yeah, that's where I stopped to check my map to like continue on my way. So, like when I saw that in the movie, I like freaked out a little bit. I was like, oh shit, I've been there. And so anyway, so I went down to Miami Beach from Calgary, and to get there, I had to like take a flight, and it had to be a connecting flight. So I had to go to Toronto. So I went to Pearson Airport, and the U.S. customs side closes overnight. So like if you have a so if you have a flight in the morning or something, you have to sort of either like get a hotel to stay in overnight, or you can like try to like wait in the general waiting area until the morning when the U.S. Customs side opens up. So I ended up going down to the end of Terminal One, where there's like there's a bunch of like benches that are set out, and I ended up sleeping on one of the benches. And like during the middle of the night, like there was people who came in and like slept on the benches as well. And then I got in to the U.S. Customs side to get my flight down to Miami Beach. And when I was there, I was like, I kept for some reason thinking about Courcelette. That was like a thing that just kept popping up in my head, and I was like, oh, maybe I should try to like figure out how to get to Courcelette, because I have another ancestor, another like grandparent, great grandparent, who would have also fought at Courcelette. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll go check that out. So I looked it up, figured out how to get there. It's like I want to say it's like a 3 to 4 hour drive outside of Paris. And so I sorted all that out and was like, okay, when I get back from Miami Beach, I'll figure out how to do this at the end of the month. So I went to Miami Beach. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't as fun as it was the first time that I went. One of my favorite places to eat down there was called Tap Tap, and that was a Haitian restaurant that was in, I want to say, South Beach neighborhood. I could be wrong about that. But yeah, that was like my favorite place to go for food, and it was closed. So that was sad. But the beach was okay. Beach was beach. And then I went back to Montreal. I started working on like practicing my French more, which was actually pretty handy. And then I went to Paris for the first time. So yeah, so that was super cool. And so when I was in Paris, I spent a few days there. I just kind of wandered around the city a lot. I didn't really have a plan on anything that I wanted to see. I didn't do any of the museums or anything like that. But it was also the Rugby World Cup was going on at that point in time. And so I ended up getting to watch France's first game of the Rugby World Cup in this little bar with all of these French fans, and like that was super cool because they kept like randomly singing like La Marseillaise, which was awesome. When I was there, I went to visit this little church where the patron saint of Paris is Saint Genevieve, and that was super cool. What else did I do? I mostly walked around and like checked out all like the little Space Invaders and stuff that have been put up on the walls everywhere, because like I make pixel art sometimes, and so that was super cool just to like check out like tile work of graffiti that somebody did that was pixel art, which was just a lot of fun to walk around the streets and find. Honestly, I forget a lot of the stuff that I did, but then I rented a car and I went out to Courcelette. There's really not a lot to see there. It's just like a tiny village with like 3 roads that meet in the center of it. And it's like a blink and you miss it kind of place, but it was kind of an important it was an important place for Canadian military history, if you will, because I want to say Courcelette was sort of where the Canadian Expeditionary Force proved that they should actually fight together as opposed to being split up into among the British Expeditionary Force. And so a lot of that was, I want to say, due to the Van Dews who were from Montreal and the 25th who were from Nova Scotia. I could be wrong about this, but that was kind of important. A bunch of the trench names were kind of interesting because there was like a Regina Trench and Kenora Trench, I think, which was really fascinating because I was like, I'd just driven through those cities not too long ago. Anyways, and then from there I went to a few other places. I went to Vimy Ridge when I was out there. I saw the giant monument that was there. And then I went to Beaumont Hamel. I walked the battlefield of Beaumont Hamel. I went up to where the Danger Tree was, and that's sort of like, speaking of high tide moments in, you know, dreams of nationhood, that's sort of like a high tide moment in the nation, in the dream of Newfoundland having been able to potentially become its own nation. But because, you know, a lot of the losses that they suffered there, it sort of destroyed their working age male population, which led to them having to resort to from being a somewhat independent colony to being more of a almost directed colony. These aren't the correct terms, but of Britain again, and then until the end of World War II, when they were basically told, you need to figure out where you want to go. Do you want to become Canadians, Americans, or some third option? And that was when they voted to join Confederation in 1949. But a lot of that came out of what happened on July 1st in Beaumont Hamel. And so I went there, and that was very cool. A lot of my family traditionally is from Newfoundland, and so it was very cool to get to go see that. I know these words are kind of maybe don't carry the weight of the moment that you might want them to, but yeah, all of that was like super interesting to go see. I slept for a bit at Vimy before I drove back into Paris. That was such a cool experience, man. I got to drive through the Arc de Triomphe twice. I got to do it once in the morning. I got to do it once at night. It's such a cool experience because, like, you just drive into the traffic and you just meld with it, and then you meld out of it, and it's just such a smooth experience that, like, at first it seems intimidating, but then, like, as you're doing it, you're like, no, this is actually super easy. Like, it just sort of works. It's kind of like driving around in New York itself, where it's like nobody follows the actual lines that are on the road. Everybody just shifts with the traffic around them, and it's like if you can stay with everybody else, then you're fine. If you're very dead set on like, no, this is the lane that I'm in, well, you're gonna have some problems, you know. So it's like it's fine. I spent maybe a couple more days, maybe one or two more days in Paris, and then I came back to Montreal. At which point I decided to settle down and start sort of making some like music stuff again. But I was gonna try to like learn about like maybe like more the music production side of things. So I started working on some like lo-fi beat little things that I made. That was a ton of fun to do. And then I decided that I would do a trip that was like purely for me, that wasn't related to anything else historically. And it was more of like a personal sort of trip, and I went to Italy. So I went to Italy for the first time, and I will tell you about that because this is like an hour. I will tell you about that in one moment.